Hey guys, tonight we step softly into Saigon's old bones, the kind of place where doors outnumber yawns and your hair loses the polite fight with humidity in the first 5 minutes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me your city and what time it is for you down in the comments. I'm slowly sketching a little night map of where we're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are walking after rain. The pavement carries a shy shine, and the ficus leaves along the boulevard are rinsed clean, veinwork glinting like silver threads. You follow the soft yellow of old street lamps, the kind with glass that makes even puddles look warm. In Saigon, rain never exactly stops. It just takes tea breaks. You hear it dripping from a balcony rail, tapping the lid of a clay jar, ticking from a gutter like a very patient metronome. It sets your pace as you turn toward a mansion-turned-museum where, people say, the doors have a sense of humor and arithmetic. You slow at the gate. A breeze slips through the ironwork and does a quick inventory of your pockets, then whispers a number in your ear, as if the wind itself is counting. 1, 2, 3. You smile at the superstition, but you answer the count anyway, because that's what tonight is about. Letting the city teach you how it remembers. Under your shoes, the tiles are patterned and cool, the famous Garchbong cement tiles. Small, matte galaxies poured and pressed by hand. Here, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, French tastes mingled with local craft to seed Saigon with these motifs: lotus, waves, windmill stars, an obscure but satisfying tidbit. The molds for these tiles were once traded like family recipes, and some sets still pass between workshops as quietly as heirlooms. You step from crescent to petal to spiral, as if moving through chapters. A mainstream fact eases in as gently as the breeze. During the era of French Indochina, Saigon became a showcase of colonial urban planning, with broad boulevards, civic buildings, and a grid that tried some days bravely to tame tropical exuberance. The Central Post Office, the Opera House, the Hotel de Ville, these were not just addresses. They were arguments, laid in stone and iron, for order in a place that preferred vines. Yet even here, the city answered back. Shutters grew wider for cross-ventilation, verandas deepened to shelter from monsoon tantrums, and the palette shifted to colors that looked good, wearing rain. You rest your palm on the first door. It is not heavy. It just has opinions. The wood is old enough to have attended several name changes of the city from Saigon to Ho Chi Minh City, and it creaks in a polite bilingual way. Somewhere inside, a key ring jingles, and with it comes a soft clatter, like tiny wind chimes, agreeing to open the evening. The night guard waves. A man whose walk says he knows which plank will complain and which hinge appreciates compliments. He offers a key that sings, just a little off-pitch, perfect for the first door. You take it, you turn it, the door exhales. You enter to a breath of cool air and something faintly sweet. Someone will call it jasmine, someone else will insist on bong lai, and you decide both are correct because tonight you're here to be generous with names. Your steps shorten, not out of fear, but respect. If you've ever had a grandparent with a very tidy living room, you know this pace. The careful toe-to-heel glide that says, "I will not disturb the lace." You begin counting doors for fun. 4, 5, 6. Your voice goes quiet, as if every number were a coin you are placing on a low altar. A breeze moves somewhere ahead, and you half believe it's counting with you. You pass a window with louvered shutters, those slanted wooden eyelids. Let air in while keeping light shy. In places like this, shutters are the city's lungs. You listen, and the building breathes. You drift by a column whose capital wears a modest garland French on top, Vietnamese in the way it learned to ignore straight lines when the vines insisted. A thin crack runs down the plaster like a laugh line. In the crochal, you notice a frieze of swirls that look suspiciously like the ones on a lacquer tray you saw at a market earlier, where a vendor told you completely seriously that the best way to keep a tray from warping was to serve more tea. You believed him, because some advice is useful even when it's a poem. A historian still debate moment slips in on velvet pause. Who exactly designed certain landmark buildings here? The Central Post Office is often attributed by postcards and easy tour scripts to Gustave Eiffel. Others argue for Alfred Foulou or a composite authorship in the Colonial Public Works Office. Drawings, records, and memories don't always agree. And in Saigon, uncertainty survives better than certainty in the humidity. The same ambiguity will brush against the mansion you're exploring now. Blueprints revised on the fly, builders adjusting for sun and wind, the final author a chorus instead of a signature. The floor cools your soles through the leather. The echo is soft, more of a murmur than a clap, so you place your heels down with care. On the left, a hallway peels away to offices where, by day, labels get spellings right and temperature is a negotiated piece. By night, the hallway is busy with nothing at all. A draft rehearses, a curtain practices modesty, a speck of dust decides to have a glittering career in a shard of light. Your shoulders lower, your breath joins the buildings. You pause beneath a ceiling fan whose blades move just enough to persuade the air. Fans here have a personality. They hum like a small boat engine and believe in democracy for breezes. You stand under it, and remember that Saigon's heat is not a problem to be solved, but a relationship to be managed. When you travel, you learn quickly that comfort is mostly choreography. You pass a glass-fronted cabinet that shelters porcelain bowls with delicate rims. One has a tiny chip, the kind you notice only if you lean close and tilt your head like a curious bird. A custodian once told you the chip happened decades ago when someone, excited by conversation, gestured with a dusting cloth and history flinched. In the ledger, the incident is recorded in a tone so polite it's practically a bow. 7, 8, 9. You catch yourself counting in 2 languages, because numbers love borrowing passports. Outside, a scooter hums by, then another. Somewhere a late cafe froths condensed milk into coffee with the vigor of a street drummer. You file away a soft fact for later. The city's favorite iced coffee likely owes a debt to the long shelf life of sweetened milk in tropical climates and to French habits of drinking strong. You'll also tuck away a small debate for rainy afternoons, whether the word faux nods to pot au feu or not. People argue this with the good humor of old friends and the zeal of weather. A framed plan is mounted near a stairwell. Lines, measurements, dignified arrows. You look from paper to wall, from idea to object, trying to match door to door like a calm detective. The plan insists there are so many openings. Your eyes count one less. You are not bothered. In places like this, numbers shrug. If a door has elected to be more story than wood, who are you to force it to sit for a census? You take the stairs slowly, hands sliding along a cool rail that has been steadied by a million other hands. Wood remembers the polite ones. Halfway up, the fan's breeze falters and resumes, as if considering a vacation and then nobly choosing duty. You nod to it like to a civil servant at closing time. At the landing, you stop. Across the hall, a doorway frames a tame rectangle of night. The courtyard beyond is dark silver. A pot of something green rests by the step, maybe basil, maybe something with a name you'll mispronounce beautifully and be forgiven. You breathe in and realize the sweet trace in the air really is jasmine tonight. Or maybe it's the memory of jasmine. The difference matters less than the intention. Someone, sometime, wanted this hallway to smell like kindness. 10. You whisper it. The number doesn't echo. It settles. It knows it belongs here. You touch the door gently, not to open it, but to let it know you noticed. If there is a 99th door somewhere ahead, it has no obligations to reveal itself tonight. You are not here to collect proofs, only to practice attention. You look back down the stair to where the first door rests, closed again, perfectly at ease. There is no hurry. The city has always been better at patience than schedules. You slow your breathing to match the fan, and in doing so, you join a rhythm older than the blinds, older than the glass, older even than the keys. You continue. The night approves. The night guard offers you a key as if he's handing over a small brass moon. It's heavier than you expect, warm where his palm was, cool where the evening seeped through. The bow of the key is oval, worn into a smoothness that only years and pockets can accomplish. You turn it in your fingers, and it gives a faint, agreeable chirp against the ring, yes, a key that sings. You try not to look too pleased about this new instrument, but your wrist is already practicing the motion. Insert, quarter turn, patient pause. Listen for the soft click that sounds like a polite nod. He gestures toward the first door, and you step forward together, the way two people carry a long story, one hand each. He calls the lock au hua and pats the panel like an old friend. You lean close. It's a mortise lock, the kind the French were fond of. The mechanism tucked inside the wood, like a heart in a rib cage. A mainstream fact strolls in wearing sensible shoes. When French Indochina standardized procurement for public works, hardware traveled with blueprints, hinges, latches. Even window stays arrived by crate, along with cement and tiles. Over time, local carpenters adapted the details. Wider gaps for swelling in the wet season. Extra vents near the transom to make peace with afternoon heat. The result wasn't purely French or purely Vietnamese. It was the practical handshake of both. You try the turn yourself. The key fits with an almost theatrical precision. Brass to brass, a well-rehearsed duet. The guard smiles with the calm of a man who trusts hinges more than alarms. Keys, he says, are like neighbors. You don't realize how many you have until you make a list. He taps the ring, dozens of teeth, each with a personality, none in a hurry. The ring's weight tugs gently at his belt. He walks as if pulled by a small planet of metal. An obscure tidbit slips in, quiet as a moth. Old custodians swear by lemon and ash for polishing brass. Cut a wedge, dip it in cool ash from the brazier, rub until last year's fingerprints become this year's glow. It's not chemistry class. It's sentiment with results. You notice how the plate around the keyhole has 2 shades of shine, like a smile that's half new, half remembered. You open the door together. Inside, the entry hall is cooler, the floor continuing in an inlaid geometry that looks as if the tiles agreed to dance in squares. The guard points up to a narrow opening above the lintel loggia, a little wind-eye so the hall can exhale without opening the door itself. Tropical problems rarely accept single-solution answers. Buildings here learn to breathe sideways. You file that away as architecture behaving like a living thing, doors as lips, shutters as eyelids, vents as collarbones. You ask about the keys, and he gives you a quick taxonomy. The long one with the notched shaft is for the old document cabinets. The short, stubborn one for the basement where paint cures slowly. The thin reed of a key for a lock that's more suggestion than security. There's even a key that opens nothing anymore, but refuses to retire. It rides the ring like a grandfather who still insists on tying sailor knots at family gatherings. You respect that. A historian still debate moment drifts in like the smell of rain on brick. The origin of the name Saigon. Was it from the Khmer Pre Nokor, the forest city that preceded the Vietnamese settlement? Or did it shapeshift from Saigon, a transcription that wandered through languages like a traveler changing hats? Some insist it's tied to the kapok trees long gone that once stood like soft, white, linteled sentries. The city answers with a shrug only old cities can pull off. It has been all of these, and will be whatever you call it when you are in love with it. The guard shows you how to carry yourself so the building cooperates. Walk on the quiet tiles, he hints. The ones that don't try to be important. You test the advice and discover the plain squares near the wall make less conversation than the decorative band in the middle. Practical wisdom masquerading as courtesy. He also tips you off to the personality of doors. If a panel sticks, don't argue. Touch the frame just above the latch there, and try again. More often than not, the door remembers its manners. You pause at the threshold and notice the sill is slightly higher than average. He nods before you can ask. In older houses, a raised threshold is a courtesy to water, and according to many households, a discouragement to wayward spirits who trip easily. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe it's clever splash management. Either way, thresholds here do real work. You lift your foot just a little higher and feel yourself become an accomplice to the building's habits. On the wall, a small, unobtrusive red charm sleeps above the jamb, nothing theatrical. Just a square of paper with characters faded to a cinnamon blush. You don't point. You just notice. Protective marks live quietly in these places. So do modern codes. Exit signs hum. Emergency lights perform their nightly dress rehearsal while pretending not to be there. The partnership between ritual and regulation is surprisingly cordial. Both want everyone home safe. A mainstream historical note wanders in. During the colonial era, city addresses became codified blocks, lots, numbers. Bureaucracy has its own poetry, and cadastral maps from the early 20th century can read like atlases of intentions. The guard once saw an old survey of this quarter. The mansion, a neat polygon. The courtyard as precise as a diagram of a lung. Then monsoon reality added, its personal edits, drains decided, alternate routes. Trees did what trees do, and the polygon rounded its corners like a patient teacher. He lets you hold the key ring for a minute, and it's heavier than stories make it sound. You feel the literal pull of responsibility, the implied promise of getting people out as much as letting them in. You picture day staff rehearsing disasters they hope never to meet. And somewhere between the rehearsal and the reality, you understand why museums cultivate quiet. Quiet is a safety protocol as much as a mood. Another obscure tidbit nudges your sleeve. In some workshops, when a key refuses to behave, a smith will stroke its edge with a sliver of beeswax, arguing softly that metal responds better to honey than to force. You try it and almost hear the lock say thank you. Whether mechanics or charm, you accept the result with the good manners of a guest. You move past a shallow alcove where a ceramic water jar rests. The lid is wooden, the cup inverted on top. This is simple hospitality. Anyone may drink. Put the cup back inverted when you're done, so dust keeps its distance. A small kindness in a hallway of important doors. The guard tells you that decades ago, during brownouts, a candle used to live here, tucked behind the jar. Light for lightless times, fire registered as a neighbor, not an alarm. You ask, quietly, about counting doors. He chuckles the way people do when a legend has paid the rent for 1,000 tours. Some days he counts 98, some days 99. Renovations hide a door inside a wall. A wall reveals a door under an old poster. Buildings molt, he says, the way snakes do. Everyone notices the shine, few notice what got left in the grass. You jot his line in your pocket notebook because some sentences deserve a second life later. Another debate brushes by how many builders shaped this complex. Archives present names and dates like polite handshakes. Oral histories swear by the memory of a particular craftsman who could bend wood's temper with a look. You decide both can be true. The city has always recruited both signatures and calluses. Before you leave the hall, the guard teaches you one last trick: how to lock a door so it closes with the sound of agreement. Ease it until the latch kisses the strike. Pause for half a heartbeat, then finish the turn. Click. If you rush, the door sulks. If you bully, it remembers. You try his way. The click is so content you want to frame it. You hand the keys back and your palm holds their shape for a second like a pressed leaf. He pockets the ring and gestures toward the corridor where the evening runs thinner and the tiles grow bolder. There are more doors. Of course there are. You're not in a hurry. You've learned the rhythm. You can feel the building agreeing. You walk on, counting softly, as if tucking numbers into the seams of the night. You step farther in, and the building starts telling you who it used to be. Not with portraits or plaques, but with little habits in the architecture. The way a hallway bends to catch a breeze. The way a stair widens, as if making room for a memory to pass. This was once a private residence, a mansion raised when Saigon and Lun were twin lungs of a busy colonial body. Rice barges nosed along the canals. Rubber moved out by rail, and fortunes rose on land that went from mud to mosaic in a generation. A merchant clan from the Hoa community, Chinese by ancestry, deeply local by practice, commissioned a home that could negotiate two worlds at once: French proportion and Vietnamese climate, imported elegance and handmade sense. A mainstream history note lays itself gently like a shawl on your shoulders. French Indochina, built for show and for function, boulevards that marched straight, buildings that posed, and behind them, service alleys that admitted the truth of heat and monsoon. Houses like this were hybrids on purpose. You see it in the shutters, wider than Paris would ever bother with, in the wraparound verandas that act like umbrellas you can live under, in the high ceilings that let ceiling fans do diplomacy between you and the afternoon. The railings mutter Art Nouveau. The roof vents argue convincingly for survival. You notice a strip of encaustic tiles forming a border along the salon. The pattern is restrained, interlocking leaves in a dusty blue, but a small corner reveals a maker's stamp impressed under glaze. Here's an obscure tidbit worth tucking into your pocket. Tile workshops used stamps not only for pride, but for warranty. The stamp told you whom to scold when a batch warped, and whom to invite to tea when a batch sang. Some stamps traveled with craftsmen from Macau or Marseille. Others were born right here, then copied by neighbors, in an imitation that felt more like flattery than theft. You pause at a doorway that steps up a few centimeters. It's practical. Water, insects, boundaries. But it's also etiquette. Raised thresholds teach feet to slow down. Many homes kept an altar just beyond such a step, incense coils whispering, fruit arranged like small planets, so that entering meant acknowledging not only the living rooms but the remembered ones. You can't see an altar here now, but the geometry remembers the ritual. You breathe a little deeper, without meaning to. A historian still debate, a side drifts in. Who exactly drew the original plans? Some sources attach a French architect's name with confidence that sounds like a business card. Others suggest a consortium from the Colonial Public Works Office and local master carpenters who adjusted window heights and wall thickness by feel. Building permits. If you chase them, read like polite gossip. Dates scratched, annotations added in margins, approvals stamped on Tuesdays that were probably Mondays. The truth may be a practical chorus signature, plus workshop, plus weather. You run your hand along a balustrade of turned wood smooth as old soap. In houses like this, the day once began earlier than the city outside. Kitchens lived slightly apart, not out of secrecy but temperature physics, with charcoal braziers that respected fresh air. A side stair, the service stair, allowed quiet movement at hours when the main stair would have felt too theatrical. You find that narrow flight now, not hidden, merely modest, and you put your foot on the first step as if you're wearing someone else's slippers. Down the corridor, a bank of windows shows the courtyard like a framed, breathing space. A deep eave protects the walkway. The drainage spouts are shaped with a hint of flourish, enough to make rain look organized when it falls. Another small, satisfying fact. Old households fought termites with camphor blocks tucked into drawers and with routine polish, air, sunlight. Because routine is a weapon. You imagine a line of chairs being carried out to the veranda on a Saturday morning, each blessed with a cloth and a proverb. You drift into a room that now hangs paintings but once probably heard account books turning. Real estate ledgers, rent rolls, and contracts would have crossed this floor in leather folders while tea cooled in cups thin as opinions. The city changed while those papers moved, plot by plot. The merchant family invested not only in buildings, but in a geography of influence. Corners, lanes, whole strips of street that learned to listen when they spoke. The past doesn't brag. It just leaves footprints with good souls. Another debate murmurs under the plaster. When, exactly, did this residence stop being one? Some say late in the colonial period, it took a governmental role. Others argue it moved through a series of polite reinventions after independence, administrative offices, quiet storage, a careful handover into a public museum in the late 982nd or early 992nd, depending on which set of files you trust. Dates, like shutters here, can be adjusted. The important thing is continuity. The house stayed a house for ideas of ownership, of display, of memory, even as its tenants changed their job titles. You catch sight of a contraption at the end of the hall. A caged lift, iron lattice work, as delicate as handwriting. Not many mansions flaunted such technology here. Fewer keep them with this much dignity. The crank handle is retired but still proud, and the gate slides with the weary grace of a theater curtain after a long run. You stand there smiling, because even objects can possess a personality. This one believes in upward mobility. Slowly, past the lift, a wall section shows repair where a door once was. The plaster is a slightly different white. The baseboard performs a small detour, and if you tilt your head, you can hear a draft argue that it used to be somebody. You touch the paint with 2 fingers, the universal gesture for I see you, and imagine where the missing door might have opened. A study, a nursery, a shortcut to a set of stairs that preferred discretion. Your count which you promised yourself you were not taking seriously, quietly notes the subtraction. Somewhere in your notebook, a number tilts. You lean on the sill and listen. Outside, distant scooters purr like satisfied cats. Inside, the ceiling fan negotiates a truce between air and patience. You let a bigger picture settle in. This house worked hard at being both stage and shelter. It offered facades to the street statement, pedigree and shadows to the family privacy, coolness, time. That dual citizenship between public and private is the signature of the old city. Saigon is adept at it. A boulevard that performs, a alley that confides. You circle back toward the main corridor, and the floor returns to its ceremonious pattern. A little plaque now names the room for curators' purposes, but your feet remember another designation. The place where afternoons got a second wind. You look to your left at a door that is very definitely a door, and to your right at a wall that carries itself like a door that retired without clearing its desk. You can't help it, you smile and count again, sotto voce. 98 is a promise. 99 is a rumor. The house, which has seen both, is happy to keep you guessing. You reach a balcony that overlooks the courtyard, and beyond it, the city's old conversation between Saigon and Lun. The air carries a hint of star anise from a late pot of hootiu somewhere, and the metallic whisper of scooters crossing wet pavement. From here, you can think about the house the way the house thinks about itself, as a node in a web spun by merchants who measured wealth in streets, not coins. A mainstream fact settles in like a careful ledger entry. From the late 19th century into the early 20th, members of the Hoa community, Chinese by ancestry, deeply entangled with Vietnamese life, helped wire the city with capital. They built rows of shop houses where the ground floor worked and the upper floors slept, invested in rice mills along the waterways, and assembled real estate portfolios so large that people still say numbers with a half smile, as if testing whether they taste plausible. One such clan commissioned this residence. They didn't just buy plots. They bought positions corners where shadows arrived first, blocks that captured breezes, addresses that taught letters to find them without maps. You trace the balcony rail. It's a practical thing, but it pretends to be lace. The scrolls whisper Art Nouveau. The spacing whispers, "Don't set your teacup on me." Below, a stone path makes a loop so gentle it could be a hand gesture. You imagine a morning here long before the gallery labels arrived. Clerks walking in with account books bound in cracked leather. A steward reading rent figures aloud, while a kettle threshes its own small storm. A child running in, called back by a voice that believed in indoor voices. A small city-side detour ambles up and leans on the railing beside you. A century ago, branding sang in Saigon and Lun. A local magnate made Zabong Koba, a soap with a southern girl's portrait that became household shorthand for clean. Noodle stalls built reputations on broth clarity. Tailors stitched French cuts in tropical cloth. Your house's owners moved in the same commercial weather, though not all legends belong to them. The city doesn't grant monopolies on memory. It distributes anecdotes like rain. You duck back inside as the balcony discovers a fresh draft. The hallway turns and leads you toward a room whose proportions are suspiciously persuasive. The kind of space meant to receive not just guests, but deals. In places like this, conversation would have been a currency. Vietnamese, Cantonese, French, sometimes in the same sentence. An obscure tidbit worth keeping. In old Lun, Guildhall's Horiquan, weren't only devotional sites. They doubled as chambers of arbitration and mutual aid. If a shipment stalled or a dispute over a boundary line turned prickly, a Horquan could straighten the knot faster than paperwork. You carry that model in your head as you imagine how a family like this might have made a mansion function like a guild hall with curtains. A historian's still debate breeze crosses your path. How large, exactly, was this clan's portfolio at its peak? Some figures get repeated with a reverent grin, tens of thousands of properties, whole neighborhoods under a single name, while others urge caution. Lots were subdivided, holdings merged, wartime and post-war transitions blurred lines, deeds moved through hands, some archives slept through humidity and woke up abbreviated. The uncertainty is not an error, it's an artifact. In Saigon, prosperity often traveled in caravans of paperwork, and paperwork, being human, sometimes took scenic routes. You stop at a wall map, printed decades later, for museum visitors. The downtown grid looks obedient. Then you trace a finger along the edges, where the grid melts into alleys hem, that fold and refold like fabric. Real estate empires could count frontage. Only locals could count hem. The family here knew both languages. They could talk in boulevards and whisper in alleys. A cabinet stands in the corner with glass so clear it behaves like a fourth wall. Inside, porcelain bowls, a ledger spine, a stamp with a wooden handle that has the polite posture of a schoolteacher. The stamp is the most talkative. It once hit paper with ink that smelled faintly of plums and permanence. You picture the imprint, characters in a circle, a date, perhaps an emblem no larger than a thumbnail. In households like this, stamps authorized more than contracts, they authorized mornings. Without them, paydays dribbled. With them, paydays landed. You ease along the corridor where the plaster is smooth enough to tell secrets. Somewhere in this house, a side office must have kept correspondence bound with string. French for permits, Vietnamese for neighbors, Chinese for suppliers up the Mekong who loaded sacks by moonlight. The city's economy, then as now, did most of its speaking in mixed grammar. The most precise transactions often began with T. You drift past a window, and the reflection sends you a double. You and the room behind you stitched into one temporary picture. Your double is holding a question the room has heard before. Did wealth buy certainty? The answer is always the same, polite, no. Wealth bought options, which are merely prettier uncertainties. In the next space, a wooden screen breaks the corridor into a discreet pause. It's carved with peonies and bats for luck motifs that crossed oceans so early they've forgotten being foreign. You step through and feel your pace dip. Because screens aren't furniture, they're choreography. A mainstream historical note walks in without tripping. During the colonial period, when Saigon courted spectacle, many private interiors kept a different tone, quieter, layered, built for climate and kin. Houses extended like sentences with subordinate clauses, where the meaning hid in the smaller rooms. Another debate brushes your sleeve. What of the family's relationship with civic projects? Some say philanthropy named wards and funded hospitals. Others doubt specifics and prefer to talk in generalities. That the wealthy, as elsewhere, liked marble plaques and disliked taxes. The archives provide both receipts and rumors. The house smiles without confirming. You linger at a doorway partly sealed, the plaster newer, the baseboard taking a polite detour. You can tell a door used to live here by the way the draft remembers it. If it connected to a private wing rooms for reading, for music, for the child whose footsteps the house still practices closing, it would have been a practical response to a later use. Museums need walls where families wanted thresholds. You write that down, because it feels like the city's motto. From somewhere below, a kettle knocks one's pipe settling, perhaps, or metal greeting metal. You think of the city breathing, river in and river out, cargo up and cargo down, shop shutters rising for morning. The merchant house didn't merely watch that breathing. It synchronized to it, earning when the tide was kind, planning when it sulked. The courtyard winks through the next door frame, and a frond moves like a hand waving you on. Numbers gather at the edge of your mind again. 98 has begun to feel friendly. 99 keeps its hat low. You leave the question unpressed, like a book page you'll come back to with better light. For now, you let the clan's old arithmetic fade and the building's current math take over. One step, one breath, one door that might be exactly itself, or pretending not to be. You keep walking, sleeves brushed by air that smells faintly of paper and limes, as if the house has just balanced its accounts and decided, graciously, to keep you curious. You decide to stop pretending you're not counting. You are absolutely counting. A doorway frames a square of night. A passage frames a rectangle of shadow. A cabinet door insists it should be invited to the census. Doors multiply when you look at them too closely, the way stars do. You whisper numbers so softly you're not sure if you hear yourself or if the building is humoring you. A mainstream fact arrives with a measuring tape tucked under its arm. In colonial times, plans were aspirational, and as built was a mood. Architects drew elevations in offices with admirable confidence. Contractors adjusted on site when the sun proved its opinions about heat. Windows climbed higher, vents widened, extra shutters appeared like footnotes. It means that any official count doors, windows, even rooms can be more thesis than conclusion. You can love the drawings and still trust your feet. You borrow a trick from architecture students. Pick a starting corner, walk the perimeter, log every opening that allows a person to pass without sideways apologies. Simple? Not exactly. What about double doors, one threshold, two leaves? What about a collapsing partition that used to divide a salon into twins? What about the door that retired and came back as a bookshelf with hinges? You learn quickly that counting is not arithmetic. It's diplomacy. On the second floor landing, a tiny, polite breeze lifts a lace of dust and sets it down again. You stand in the middle of 3 candidates for doorhood. A sealed arch with a ghostly outline. A functioning door with a paint history in stripes. White, cream, optimism. And a screen that slides, which is technically a door if you promise to move gently. 96, 97. Your numbers feel like tea leaves at the bottom of a cup. An obscure tidbit taps you on the shoulder. Older Vietnamese houses sometimes treated interior doorways less as walls with holes and more as thresholds that breathe. The difference shows up in carpentry vocabulary: panels that flex, lintels that float, screens that borrow air, like a neighbor borrows sugar. In coastal humidity, wood expands and contracts the way stories do with retelling. Good joinery is forgiveness engineered in advance. You press a thumb to a jamb, and it gives a patient millimeter as if to say, "I was built for weather and guests." Across the corridor, a glass case displays a faded floor plan pinned with calm pins. Someone has annotated it in pencil, decipherable in a certain slant of light. You align the drawing to the hallway paper and plaster, performing a duet, and yes, the plan insists on a doorway you do not see. You tilt your head. The baseboard bulges slightly, then resumes, like a sentence that swallowed a word. Your pencil draws a parenthesis in your notebook. Former door, now wall, still drafty. A historian still debate murmurs through the transom. Where did the phrase "the house with 99 doors" actually begin? Some attribute it to pre-war gossip columns that adored inventories. Others say it arrived in the 1992nd with a wave of travel writing that cultivated elegant spookiness. A third camp claims the nickname is older, a Churlun colloquialism muttered by delivery men who counted while they waited. The archives offer fragments. The city offers shrugs. You decide the legend might be less about arithmetic and more about appetite for thresholds, for entrances, for stories that promise a missing piece. Down a narrower hall, you find a door whose handle sits lower than its siblings, a hint that children once ruled this passage, or that a practical carpenter granted comfort to a smaller hand. You try it. The latch agrees with a low teach. Inside, a short connecting corridor, blank walls, a whispering vent, a single chair like punctuation. You back out and mark 98 with the reverence of a cathedral counter. The guard reappears, broom in hand like a scepter. He tells you that repairs tend to add walls and subtract doors. Galleries prefer display surface to circulation, and emergencies prefer corridors clear enough for quick decisions. During one renovation, a door became a false panel to stop drafts that bullied canvases. During another, a door gained weight and a new hinge to keep up with air conditioning. Doors, he says, have second careers. You jot it down. It feels true of people, too. You find a mezzanine that isn't sure whether it is a floor or a thought. From here, you see a sequence of openings lining up in a perspective trick, so satisfying it could sell biscuits. Door beyond door beyond door, each framing the next until the final rectangle is only darkness. Photographers adore these alignments. So do the part of you that loves order, and the part that suspects order is flirting. You count them, even though you know the trick may be repeating a single door. As mirrors do, you allow yourself to be fooled, because bedtime requires a little magic. Another mainstream notepad's in, tidy as a museum label. In humid climates, doors are guardians of microclimate. A closed door lets air stratify, which keeps lacquer calm, canvas tame. The mansion's later life as a museum taught it new manners. Hinges now negotiate with thermostats. Thresholds now think about visitor flow. The lock shop knows the names of curators. Buildings age like multilinguals, they switch codes mid-sentence without losing meaning. Near a corner stair, a niche presents a wooden chest, whose lid is crescent-worn, where hands lifted it for decades. In families like this, a chest might hold festival decorations, lantern tassels, red paper, strings for drums, or meticulous nothing at all, which is to say, cloth, saved because cloth always finds reasons. You don't open it. You wouldn't. The restraint feels like a small victory against impatience. And then it happens. The hallway turns, the air cools, and you meet a door that seems unfamiliar in a familiar way. Its panels are simpler, its frame a hair deeper, its handle new enough to be shy. You try it. It moves a fraction and stops not locked, more like undecided. The guard, arriving with timing that suggests he's a character in your story, nods toward a different key on his ring. This one likes a softer approach, he says, and a leftward lean. You lean. You coax. The latch sighs. 99 sits quietly in your mouth and refuses to come out. Is this the door? It is a door. You could declare victory, but you don't, because the point isn't the number. It's the listening. The missing door, you realize, is an agreement between rumor and readiness. It appears when your attention finally stops trying to own and starts trying to understand. You close the door with the click you were taught, and the corridor rewards you with a draft that smells faintly of rain and paper glue. You write a note you didn't plan to write. The 99th door is the one you open like a guest. You are surprised at yourself, which is a pleasant way to be wrong. You move on with numbers tucked away for later, feeling the count travel in your pocket like a small, warm stone. If the legend needs a door, it has one for tonight. If it needs a mystery, there is room for that too. You walk, and the house, amused, keeps you company. Upstairs, the hallway quiets, and you reach a door that feels different, quieter, softer, a bit more cautious. You've heard stories about a room upstairs, stories that start with whispers and end with raised eyebrows. In houses this old, doors sometimes become apologies. For family secrets, for illnesses, for histories carefully edited out of polite conversation. A mainstream historical note steps in gently. In old Saigon, illnesses that today are manageable once caused panic. Families fearing stigma often secluded sick members quietly within the home. You lean into the silence behind this door and think about the whispered rumors. The wealthy merchant's daughter confined here, isolated because of something misunderstood and feared, perhaps leprosy, perhaps something else. Historians still debate the exact truth, but in whispered exchanges over cups of tea, people swear she existed, the room existed, and both were very lonely. You turn the knob slowly, as if your politeness matters. It does. The door eases open with a soft sigh. The room inside is smaller than you imagined. Walls painted a soft, fading blue, like a sky trying not to be noticed. A single window with slats half closed lets in stripes of street lamp amber. Shadows sit on corners as if they've been waiting for you. The air here holds its breath, hoping you'll do the same. A small, obscure tidbit enters softly. Families in colonial Saigon sometimes kept porcelain bowls with half-eaten rice near secluded rooms, believing food left unfinished by spirits or ill family members could ward off further misfortune. On a low shelf, you spot a bowl that may be a museum prop, but still it has grains of rice arranged neatly, as if someone had taken a polite bite and stepped away. You hold your breath, count quietly to 3, and smile, because you feel like you're caught in a legend's polite trap. You take 2 careful steps inward. To your left, something small and pale hangs delicately. A child's white dress, linen yellowed gently by decades. It holds shape as if expecting someone who stepped away a moment ago and just forgot to return. You try not to stare, but find yourself noticing small details. The lace at the cuffs, the buttons shaped like jasmine blossoms. A whispered fact drifts by. During colonial times, linen was favored for its breathability, a necessity rather than fashion. In Saigon, fabric choice was climate negotiation. On the opposite wall, a mirror is covered with a thin white cloth, edges neatly folded. Tradition among older Vietnamese families dictated that mirrors in sick rooms or mourning spaces should be covered to prevent the trapped souls or lingering illnesses from seeing themselves and staying longer. You feel the impulse brief, irrational to peek beneath. But you decide politeness serves better than curiosity tonight. You touch the cloth softly and move on. You glance upward and find the ceiling painted subtly in faded gold and green, like leaves that have slowly forgotten to grow. A small ventilation hole, barely noticeable, punctures the corner. Practical and understated, it allows the room to breathe, another sign of thoughtful architecture. You briefly wonder if whispers traveled through it, carrying comfort from other parts of the house. In a cabinet near the door, small porcelain cups sit quietly, as if awaiting permission to speak. Such cups once held medicinal herbs, perhaps the bitter brews of traditional Vietnamese medicine, prepared to treat the illnesses misunderstood by colonial medicine. Families often turned discreetly to both methods, trusting whichever quiet remedy seemed kinder. The cups are empty now, small circles of porcelain light in the dimness, each a polite reminder that care once filled this space. You pause by the window and look outward. The city beyond sleeps lightly, rain glistening on streets. Downstairs, the guard softly whistles an old melody you can't quite name, maybe something his grandmother hummed to ease his childhood fevers. You wonder briefly if this tune drifted through doors and vents decades ago, calming someone who waited in this room for footsteps that rarely came. Another small historical debate tiptoes in. Scholars still puzzle over the extent of isolation faced by ill family members in wealthy colonial homes. Were they truly confined, or was confinement a metaphor for social distance? Written records are sparse, polite, discreet. The truth is left to the spaces themselves to explain, quietly, in shadows and silence. You stand still for a moment, feeling the floor gently creak beneath your feet, as if agreeing softly with your thoughts. History here is quieter than textbooks. It prefers hints and unfinished sentences, shadows and outlines, rather than bold declarations. You accept the room's gentle ambiguity and retreat politely, carefully closing the door. Outside, in the hall, your count resumes almost automatically. You've lost track again. Perhaps that is the polite thing for this house, to forget numbers occasionally, let legends keep their dignity. You make a mental note, not to demand precise answers from places that prefer to whisper. You walk softly on, feeling the room's story curl gently around your shoulders, like a shawl you've borrowed, just for tonight. As you walk farther down the corridor, the air seems softer, the floor more careful with its creaks. You pause near an archway and listen. Perhaps it's the quiet of the hour, or perhaps something else. But faint echoes of whispered conversations drift from the walls, stories passed from servant to servant, from generation to generation, growing less precise but more compelling with each telling. A mainstream historical fact steps in, gently brushing your sleeve. Wealthy households in old Saigon often employed multiple domestic staff cooks, maids, gardeners, many from rural provinces, speaking dialects and carrying superstitions from distant villages. Gossip traveled corridors as easily as rice traveled from kitchen to table. Secrets and legends lived not only in diaries and letters, but also in kitchen whispers and courtyard murmurs. You find yourself leaning closer to the wall, almost expecting the plaster to clarify rumors. Did servants really hear soft weeping behind closed doors? Did a maid truly see a fleeting white figure disappearing around a corner? These tales have passed quietly through corridors and kitchens, lending color and mystery to the otherwise polite routine of mansion life. You move down a small side hall, narrower and humbler than the main passageways. The door at its end is unassuming, a servant's door, simpler, quieter, practical. When you open it, it doesn't squeak. It exhales softly, as if grateful for the company. Inside, shelves line the walls, neatly holding porcelain cups, folded linen towels, and copper pots dulled by decades of quiet rest. A shelf of cleaning tools, wooden brushes, cloths, feather dusters stands politely against the far wall, almost waiting to resume duty. An obscure tidbit joins you gently. Old households in Saigon often stored rice sacks elevated on wooden planks to prevent moisture and deter rodents. You notice just such planks stacked neatly, still performing their job politely despite decades of disuse. Beside them, empty ceramic jars await ingredients no longer arriving, their mouths covered with faded cloth, tied gently like sleeping children. On one shelf, a ledger sits discreetly. You open it carefully, the pages yellowed but legible. Here are lists of household expenses: rice, fish sauce, candles. Servants meticulously recorded daily spending economy, practiced quietly, disciplined and dignified. You flip further, and the handwriting subtly shifts. Perhaps a new clerk took over. Small details, so human and quiet, remind you that history often speaks in modest ledgers more clearly than grand speeches. You imagine these servants, many far from their hometowns, learning urban rhythms, adopting city manners. Historical fact settles gently. Rural Vietnamese women frequently found employment in wealthy colonial households, gradually blending local traditions with the habits of their employers. Over time, these women became quiet historians of the everyday, keeping recipes, remedies, gossip, and household legends alive, passed softly through generations. A small debate whispers quietly. Historians still wonder how much of household legend was rooted in actual events versus the gentle exaggerations of boredom and loneliness. Were those nighttime sounds merely the natural settling of old wood and plaster, gently transformed into ghostly tales by imaginative minds? You accept that uncertainty, too, has a quiet charm. As you turn to leave, something catches your eye, a tiny cloth doll tucked behind a jar. You lift it gently, its embroidered eyes smile, stitching slightly frayed. Perhaps it belonged to a child who accompanied a servant mother here. The doll rests in your palm quietly, its presence comforting rather than eerie. You place it back carefully, leaving it as a silent guardian of quiet histories. You step back into the hallway, closing the servant's door softly behind you. This passage, modest and unnoticed, now seems filled with gentle significance. Every quiet creak, every slight breeze, every shadow seems to whisper with newfound dignity. Servants' voices, their discreet footsteps, the soft clinking of dishes, these were the quiet sounds behind the mansion's louder histories. Walking slowly onward, you recognize that legends aren't always grand. Sometimes, they're whispered in kitchens, gently shared over evening tea. They don't demand attention, they simply wait politely to be heard. You find yourself grateful to have paused, to have listened carefully enough to hear history's softer voice. Ahead, another door awaits quietly, inviting your curiosity with gentle insistence. You nod slightly to yourself, resuming your careful, counting steps. The mansion, softly amused, patiently waits for your next discovery. You move toward the hallway's end, reaching an old elevator tucked discreetly into an alcove. Its ornate ironwork curls like ink strokes frozen in air, and the wooden platform sits patiently behind its sliding metal gate. It's a relic of early modernity, when elevators were more novelty than necessity, an elegant curiosity installed to impress guests rather than carry real weight. Mainstream history glides gently in. Saigon, during its colonial peak, took pride in its elegant touches imported from France. Streetlights, boulevards, elevators. These mechanical contraptions arrived as symbols of sophistication. Yet elevators like this one quickly adapted to Saigon's slower, warmer rhythm. It moved just gently enough not to disrupt the quiet dignity of wealthy homes. Practicality often came second to charm. You slide open the gate. It rattles gently, sounding almost apologetic for disturbing the night. You step onto the platform, feeling the old wood creak slightly beneath your feet. The elevator isn't operational now, but standing here gives you the odd sensation of being politely held between floors neither here nor there, gently suspended in history. An obscure fact quietly joins you. Early Saigon elevators required regular oiling with castor oil rather than industrial lubricant. An odd choice, believed to protect delicate wooden gears in the humid climate. Mechanics here knew machines needed gentleness as much as people did. Perhaps that's why this elevator still feels more human than mechanical, more like furniture than infrastructure. Inside, a small brass plate holds instructions in elegantly scripted French, slightly worn. "Please close the gate gently." Such signs weren't merely functional, they were reminders of etiquette. Even elevators expected courtesy. You can imagine colonial families stepping in politely, holding breath briefly, smiling nervously as the lift moved carefully between levels, treating the machinery like another refined member of their household. Your hand touches a lever, now locked in place. Historians still debate exactly when elevators appeared in residential buildings in Saigon. Some argue it was the 1922nd, influenced by Parisian trends. Others suggest earlier experiments in the 1910nd, quietly tucked into private mansions. Documents offer incomplete clues, and elevators themselves remain politely silent on the matter. Perhaps they prefer the charm of ambiguity. As you exit, sliding the gate closed with a gentle rattle, you notice a large mirror nearby covered partially with a faded cloth. It seems mirrors throughout the mansion share this cautious modesty, hiding reflections out of respect for old superstitions. Vietnamese folklore suggests mirrors hold memories. Even spirits covering them was a polite way of keeping privacy intact. You nod respectfully, careful not to lift the cloth's corner. You move further along, the hallway narrowing, growing dimmer. The elevator's faint scent of wood and oil lingers on your sleeve, a quiet souvenir. From behind, you hear the iron gate gently creak, as if settling back into a polite sleep. Ahead, a small door tucked discreetly into an alcove attracts your attention. Smaller than others, easily overlooked, it seems oddly inviting. You test the handle, it yields politely. Inside, a narrow stair spirals gently upward, disappearing softly into shadow. It feels like the kind of stair servants used, discreet and practical. As you ascend slowly, your hand brushes the wooden railing, worn smooth by generations of quiet footsteps. Servants often navigated these discreet routes, unseen but essential. This stair seems to whisper their stories. Hurried movements balancing trays, careful steps avoiding creaky boards, quick whispered exchanges as they moved quietly between worlds, delivering both meals and messages. At the top, a small landing greets you politely. A narrow window opens slightly to allow fresh air. You pause here, listening. Rain taps gently on the glass, as if quietly asking permission to enter. You smile, hearing the city's distant breath street, sounds softened by walls and history. Beside you, an old broom leans quietly, its bristles softened from decades of use. An obscure tidbit whispers in your ear. Old Vietnamese homes rarely threw away brooms, they were hung quietly behind doors. Even when nearly worn out, discarding them too soon was considered disrespectful to the spirits residing in household objects. This broom, retired but dignified, seems content, waiting for a use that may never come again. You descend slowly, footsteps gentle, listening to each soft creak, as if the stairs themselves were politely sharing their memories. At the bottom, you close the small door softly behind you, feeling as if you've just stepped quietly from one century to another. You glance back toward the elevator, now resting silently, a polite reminder of past luxury. Around you, Doors and hallways wait patiently, each holding quiet stories, secrets offered gently to anyone willing to pause and listen. You resume your careful steps, counting silently. The mansion seems gently amused, knowing numbers matter less now than the quiet voices lingering softly behind every threshold. You step out into the courtyard and the air feels newly washed rain in the bricks, a trace of jasmine hiding in the vines. In the corner, a tiny shrine waits the way a library chair waits, as if it has been saving your place. A clay pot for incense, a dish of salt and rice, a shallow bowl of water holding a small, trembling moon. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, just quiet hospitality extended to any guest passing between worlds. A mainstream fact pads in softly. During the 7th lunar month, Thang Co Hon, often called the Hungry Ghost Month, Vietnamese families set out offerings to soothe wandering spirits. It isn't a festival of fear, so much as one of courtesy. Rice so a traveler won't arrive hungry, salt to keep mischief dilute, water to cool the road. You plant a single stick of incense. The smoke rises like handwriting that never needs to erase. The wind edits it gently, and you let the sentence end where it chooses. You notice details you might have missed before. The salt sprinkled in 3 little constellations. The rice mounded rather than flattened. The water bowl slightly tucked to the side so reflections don't face the door directly. An obscure tidbit slips into your pocket. Some households toss a pinch of salt across the threshold after offerings. A small, practical gesture to close the gate for the night, neither theatrical nor superstitious in tone, just tidy. The habit survived, because tidy things often do. A shape glides at the edge of the veranda. A cat, gray as cloud water. It pauses by the step and blinks with the patient confidence of creatures that see well in more than one kind of darkness. In Southern folk talk, cats are comfortable couriers. They mind their business, which is everyone else's business, quietly. The cat tastes the air near your incense and decides the situation is in good hands. It leaves the way good advice leaves without needing thanks. You linger, listening to the courtyard's grammar. Drips, leaf rustles, the shy clink of a spoon from a distant kitchenette. On a shelf just inside the door, you notice a pair of tiny red paper squares, edges browned by age. Many homes keep these for gentle protections above a lintel. At the back of a cupboard, near a mirror, mirrors especially. Older families sometimes veil them during illness or mourning. So, reflections don't hold on to what should be released. The covered mirror in the upstairs room makes a little more sense now, like a clause you finally parse on the second reading. Historians still debate the exact genealogy of these customs. Did the rites drift south from Chinese Ulambana traditions and then localize? Or do they braid with older indigenous practices of honoring Vong, the wandering dead, with rice and water? Records provide partial footnotes, households provide full sentences. You accept that the ambiguity doesn't dilute the meaning. It seasons it. Under the eave, a coil of incense hangs like a patient galaxy. Coils burn slowly. Time made visible. A caretaker told you once that shops sold coils rated in hours 4, 6, 8 useful when you want a vigil to end at dawn without setting an alarm. You file that in the drawer where useful meets poetic. At the base of the shrine, 2 small figures sit. One jolly, one businesslike Ong Dira, the earth deity, with bare belly and open grin, and Thun Tai, the god of wealth, neat as an accountant. In southern storefronts, they often keep each other company near the door, inviting good humor and good ledgers. Here, tucked in a museum's corner, their presence feels less about prosperity and more about permission, You may pass, they seem to say, and we'll keep the lights polite. You add a jasmine bloom to the dish. The fragrance lifts the way memory lifts, unhurried, allowing room for second thoughts. Another quiet fact. Jasmine, hoa nhai, bong lai often accompanies domestic altars in the South. A scent that doesn't interrupt conversation. Flowers here behave the way furniture does. They belong by being useful. You let a small suspense build, not the kind with violins, but the kind with breath. The mansion is waiting to see whether you understand that courtyards are not pauses between rooms. They are rooms with sky for ceiling and rain for punctuation. Perhaps, once, a servant placed offerings here before dawn, when the house exhaled last night and inhaled today. Perhaps, once, a girl stood at the upstairs window and watched the smoke braid itself into morning. Another, historians still debate moment pads in with dry feet. Do households aim the altar to face the main door, to greet guests seen and unseen, or do they offset it, so force and luck don't collide head-on? Manuals disagree. Elders disagree. Practice wins. The position you see tonight is balanced, not symmetrical, another local specialty. A very local custom passes by wearing slippers. The kitchen gods, Ong Tao, receive offerings that acknowledge the moral weight of stew and steam. Kitchens are where peace is negotiated daily. No wonder households offer tiny cups of tea there, too. You remember a narrow stair you climbed earlier, the one servants used, and imagine its steps counted in ladles and lullabies. The candles gutter and recover. A scooter hums somewhere beyond the wall, and for a second the bowl of water vibrates a city heartbeat. You can see. You take the hint and dip your fingertips lightly, not as ritual but as courtesy, as if to say, I understand this is shared space. Drops fall back, neat little meteors, returning home. You stand, wipe your fingers on your palm, and give the shrine a nod that is almost a bow. You realize offerings reorganize the air. After you set them out, rooms become kinder. Not serener. Kindness and serenity aren't always twins, but kinder. It's a small distinction you decide to keep. As you re-enter the corridor, you feel the house's temperature change by a thought or two. Doors ahead look less like challenges and more like invitations. You aren't tallying now. You're listening. The cat reappears at the far corner and performs the briefest, laziest stretch known to zoology. The stretch says, proceed. You do, carrying jasmine in your pocket and a little salt at the threshold of thought, just in case numbers try to make the night too narrow. You re-enter the corridor and feel daylight hiding in the walls, the kind of daylight that still remembers school groups and whispering docents. This house learned a second language when it became a museum. You can hear it in the way footsteps change vocabulary from family to public. Frames now share the walls with vents and sensors. Stories that once moved by rumor, move by label. A mainstream fact walks in wearing a visitor sticker. The residence was formerly repurposed for art in the late 20th century, its galleries opening to the public not long after the collections found their footing. Since then, rooms that once hosted ledgers and tea now host canvases and careful climate. The museum's holdings span oil on canvas, silk painting lura, and lacquer sonmai, along with sculpture and older artifacts that traveled here from deeper layers of Vietnamese time. You step into a gallery and feel the air change drier, steadier, the kind of air that negotiates with centuries. On one wall, a lacquer panel glows the way embers glow when you stop telling stories and just listen. Vietnamese lacquer isn't paint in the ordinary sense. It's a tree's patience, hardened into sheen. Layers of resin are mixed with pigments, inlaid with eggshell or mother of pearl. then smoothed with charcoal and water, until the surface remembers light as depth. An obscure tidbit leans close. Some artisans favored quail eggshell for its freckle stars scattered by accident into constellations of design. You find yourself smiling at the idea that breakfast has a cameo in eternity. Across from it, a silk painting breathes like fabric left in shade. Silk doesn't blare. It murmurs. Colors seep rather than sit: mineral blues, vegetable greens, careful reds that prefer to be suggestions. Mounting silk requires tenderness, rice, starch paste, bamboo spatulas, patience measured in breaths. You lean closer and notice the brushwork's restraint. An older Saigon talent, saying precisely enough, and then stopping. A historian's still debate note clears its throat in the corner. Who gets to be called the pioneer of modern Vietnamese lacquer art? Some champion a handful of artists educated at the colonial-era École des Beaux-Arts de l'Indochine in Hanoi. Others widen the credit to include workshop masters, whose names live more on tool handles than on catalogs. The truth, you suspect, is layered like lacquer itself, school on top of craft on top of tree, each necessary, none sufficient alone. You drift to a case displaying older objects. A champa relief fragment, pale sandstone carved with a rhythm that feels like both ocean and breath. A handful of okyo beads the color of old honey. A mainstream fact speaks softly. The southern lowlands once hosted okro culture, a trade web humming between the Mekong Delta and the Indian Ocean. Long before the city learned French, goods moved, deities traveled under other names, and motifs took root like mangrove, gripping mud and water with equal loyalty. Your eye catches a tiny conservation label: relative humidity target, temperature, a warning about pests with appetites for starch. Another obscure tidbit knocks politely. To keep cabinets from smelling closed, custodians sometimes tuck a tiny parcel of charcoal in the corner, odor tempered by a patient geology lesson. In the old days, camphor blocks patrolled drawers. Now data loggers do. Both believe in vigilance. Only one beeps. The guard appears and stands a respectful distance away, as if leaving space around the paintings is part of his job description. He mentions that doors learned new manners when the museum moved in. Some were sealed to make wall. Others gained gaskets to keep the climate faithful. A good gallery, he says, lets art breathe without letting weather argue. You nod another sentence to pocket. You notice how labels choose tone. Dates, medium, dimensions, a sentence of context that attempts to be both generous and brief. A small quarrel lives under the typography. Should labels teach or simply accompany? Historians still debate the right balance: too much text and eyes tire. Too little and meaning wobbles. Tonight, the labels behave like considerate chaperones. They introduce, then step back. In a side gallery, a photograph shows the building mid-transition. Scaffolding like bamboo skeleton. Walls half-primed. A doorway yawning, where a wall will later stand with poise. You trace the remembered openings with your finger, mapping the before and after like a game you refuse to win. The number of doors changed. Of course it did. Museums need longer walls. Houses need shorter distances. You let the arithmetic go and keep the feeling. You pause before a painting of the river, not the polite postcard version, but a working river. Tugboats bulging with effort. Banks cluttered with useful chaos. The caption notes a date you know intimately by now. A decade when the city practiced reinvention as a daily exercise. You think of the mansion doing the same, changing job titles without changing temperament. Stage. Shelter. Shelter. Stage. An attendant wheels by with a tool cart that makes a friendly click at every fourth tile. The cart reminds you museums are rehearsals, lights set and reset, frames tightened, glass polished with cloths that remember older fingerprints. Another obscure note. When hanging lacquer, two people breathe together before the final lift, so the panel doesn't fog with surprise. Ritual disguised as ergonomics. Outside the window, dusk dips its brush in the courtyard. Inside, track lights take over politely. The paintings accept the night with professional grace. You find that art changes your stride slower, less linear, more like the spirals on a tile border. You wonder if the house approves of this new choreography. Museums, after all, are houses that keep company with attention. A final historian still debate slips in wearing sensible shoes. Did the building serve an official function between private residence and museum administrative? Transitional, something politely unnamed. Records leave ellipses. Oral memory fills them with anecdotes that behave like plausible furniture. You decide uncertainty belongs here. A perfectly labeled past would feel oddly out of place. You stand in the doorway, half in the gallery, half in the hall, and listen. The building hums with quiet systems compressors far away, a fan's patient syllables, the softest whisper of a seal settling around a doorframe. Daylight has left. The museum's second shift has begun. You tuck the knowledge away with your jasmine bloom. This house learned to carry art the way it once carried secrets, firmly, kindly, with more doors than numbers can explain. You move on, letting the glow of lacquer follow you a few steps, as if the resin saved a little light just for your shoulder. Morning edges into the house like a librarian, quiet, competent, unimpressed by legend. You arrive with a small group of architecture students who have clipboards, laser measurers, and the alert faces of people who intend to turn rumor into numbers before lunch. The guard watches them the way a gardener watches weather. Curious, resigned, certain that the tomatoes will be tomatoes no matter what the forecast says. A mainstream fact finds a seat in the front row. Under the French administration, the city embraced the metric system, cadastral surveys, and a tidy appetite for as-recorded drawings. Blocks became polygons, lots received numbers, and facades learned to stand for photographs with decent posture. Even so, houses like this, built at the seam of imported geometry and local weather, often ended up as bilingual. Plans spoke in meters. Rooms answered in breezes. The students establish rules with the solemnity of a card game. A door, one declares, is a full-height, human passage opening with a closable leaf. Another raises a finger. But what about porte-fenêtre? The French door that opens to a balcony. Is it a window pretending, or a door moonlighting? A third proposes categories: hinged, sliding, screened, ceremonial, service. You admire the taxonomy the way you admire a well-packed suitcase. Everything has a pocket, and yet socks will still escape. You set off together at a dignified trot. The laser declares distances, like a tiny, precise trumpet. A student whispers measurements, another logs them, and the mansion does what mansions do when measured. It reveals a personality that loves exceptions. A double-leaf entry counts as one threshold. A sliding screen in a secondary corridor counts if it closes a room, but not if it only hosts a draft. The porte-fenêtre earns a split vote and a compromise. Door when open, window when closed. The mansion, amused, offers a breeze. An obscure tidbit pops out from behind a frame. Some older carpenters, superstitious in a practical way, tucked a thin coin under a threshold during installation. Luck for the household, steady feet for the wood. Not every threshold has one, not every coin stayed put. but you feel the urge to step a little lighter anyway, just in case you're walking across someone's quiet blessing. The count climbs. 79. 88. The hallway brightens, and so does the mood. Numbers make caffeine look slow. On the landing, a student produces a chalk stub to mark what's been tallied. The guard's eyebrows perform a soft caution, and the chalk retreats. The museum prefers memory to graffiti. Instead, you agree to draw a floor plan on paper and give each door a nickname. Tall shutters, bashful handle, retired librarian. The house, being a good sport, behaves for at least 6 doors in a row. Then the plan and the walls have a disagreement. A drawing from the archives insists there's an opening on the east side of the mezzanine. The east side declines to participate. You run a fingertip along the baseboard. Feel a subtle hiccup in the molding and X-door-shaped politeness. In fills. A student nods, writing with satisfaction. When the residence became a museum, walls gained seniority. What families once needed in circulation, galleries now need in display. The past says threshold. The present says hang space. Both are right, in their century. A historians still debate moment sits down at your table uninvited. Where did the 99 come from? Some argue the phrase predates the museum, whispered by delivery men and domestic staff when the house was busiest. A shorthand for too many to mind. Others suspect it arrived with later travel writing, part arithmetic, part poetry. A third group smiles and points at numerology 9 as endurance, cool as long-lasting, 99 as abundance that stops one step before perfection, which is the polite place to stop. The city refuses to rule. It permits you all 3 answers if you carry them without swagger. By late morning, you have a respectable tally and a respectful headache. 96, then 97, then an unexpected 98, when someone reclassifies a sliding partition as not a door, more a suggestion. You break for water under the courtyard eave and discover the trivial thrill of aligning the laser down a row of open frames door, nested indoor like a perspective joke that keeps a straight face. The red dot trembles and steadies on the far jamb, as if the building is holding its breath for your amusement. Back inside, the students attempt a decisive sweep. They adopt a conservative counting rule. If you can walk through it without turning sideways, and it can be closed in some mechanical way, it counts. Instantly, 2 petitions arrive. What about the open arch between salon and hall? It's passable, but never closes. Denied. What about the false panel that used to be a door and still drafts like one? Denied with sympathy. The guard, asked for a ruling, shrugs in fluent neutrality. Doors, he says, are like relatives you think you've met them all until New Year. You climb to the top floor where heat lingers like a conversation that refuses to end. Here, a row of narrow rooms complicates the day. Each has a proper door. Each opens and closes, and yet one has its lintel a whisper lower. Child's room, someone guesses, or carpenter's economy, another counters. A mainstream fact offers a hand. Many southern homes varied heights deliberately to vent heat across corridors. Others varied heights by accident, material shortage, on-site edits, or a craftsman's honest belief that 5 centimeters never broke a friendship. Houses are negotiated objects. Uniformity is often a rumor that plans tell. You swing around a final corner and the number hovers. Pesky and unresolved. 98, depending on whether bashful handle consents. 99, If you let the balcony porte-fenêtre be courageous. 100. If you count the double-leaf grand door as 2, which the mathematician in the group refuses on principle and the poet allows on Tuesdays. The building, unhelpful in the best way, provides evidence for all camps. Another obscure detail presents itself as a consolation prize. Behind a utility panel, penciled on raw plaster, someone long ago wrote a date and a name in slanting Vietnamese script. Perhaps a mason marking completion. Perhaps a foreman promising to come back with hinges. Craftsmen sign in places owners never look. A building keeps those signatures like keepsakes in a bottom drawer. You note it, because private pride is still history. By afternoon, the tally is declared provisionally inconclusive. A phrase academia uses when a nap would help. The students vow to return with older plans, humidity readings, and a more elegant definition of doorhood. You applaud their rigor and secretly admire the legend's agility. It isn't that the number refuses to be caught. It's that the number keeps changing hats when you look away. On your way down the stair, you pass a threshold where the wood dips underfoot, just a fraction the exact dip of habit. You feel certain feet have crossed here more often than elsewhere. Counting hasn't solved the mystery, but it has taught you where attention pools. Perhaps that's what 99 is. A map of where the house prefers to be noticed. Back at the ground floor, the guard asks, with the patient curiosity of someone who has watched this play before, "So how many?" You give him the most honest answer available, enough to make the story true. He nods, satisfied not with arithmetic, but with manners. You pocket your pencil, fold the plan, and let the building keep its last digit. Numbers are for daylight. At night, the house prefers names. Night asks for smaller footsteps. So you oblige. The guard hands you a notebook, a thin, cloth-bound thing with a pencil tucked under its strap, and invites you on rounds. Write what you notice, he says, not what you expect. You appreciate the difference. Expectation is loud, noticing is polite. Down the main hall, lights soften to the museum's night setting. Motion sensors blink like patient fireflies, cameras keep their quiet geometry, and a single fan whispers diplomacy between temperature and treasure. A mainstream fact slides in with a flashlight held low. Most museums practice preventive conservation more than dramatic restoration. Night checks confirm relative humidity in a narrow range, temperatures that don't argue, and air that avoids sudden opinions. Doors here aren't just thresholds, they're climate valves. You nod, and the notebook's first line writes itself, air behaving. At the first corner, you stop at a round wall clock, except it isn't a clock. The guard shows you the slit on its side. Once upon a time, watchmen carried keys to punch their route into a paper dial inside, proof that every station was visited. Detex, the brand used in 100 cities, traveled farther than its advertisements promised. Obscure tidbit worth pocketing. Older night guards rubbed a whisper of graphite on the key's tip so the punch wouldn't tear the paper. A small trick that made diligence look elegant. Tonight, the device is retired, but mounted in place. A modest relic of vigilance. You log the first entry. 2215 East Corridor clear. A draft rehearsing along baseboards. The guard smiles at your choice of verb. He prefers rehearsing to rattling. Words matter in buildings that listen. From the ceiling, a soft tick, tick forms where cooling pipes remember the heat of day and forget it in increments. You write that down too. Pipes performing subtraction. Past a doorway, the lacquer gallery glows like cooled lava. You pause at a tiny instrument blinking on a shelf, a data logger recording temperature and humidity with the patience of moss. The guard taps its screen and the numbers sit in their chairs like good students. Museums carry time in layers: artistic, architectural, mechanical, and tonight, you are their hall monitor. If a seal fails, the guard says, the painting doesn't shout, the instrument tattles. You add that to the notebook with a grin. On the stair landing, Jasmine wanders in from a vent, a suggestion rather than a scent. You note it without decoration, then underline it once, because nights are built on small emphasis. Another historian still debate steps into your margin. When did this house gain reliable electricity? Some ledgers hint at wiring in the 1910 others suggest proper installation in the 1920 when generators became less moody. Oral histories remember oil lamps and early switches politely sharing evenings. The building, asked for comment, offers a half-wink from a porcelain switch plate near the stairs, a survivor that now merely poses. Down a narrower hall, your shoes rethink their volume. The tiles here prefer whispers. The guard shows you a trick for quiet floors. A fingertip's worth of beeswax at a stubborn joint, buffed with a cotton rag, persuades tile and wood to be friends again. You watch him polish a sigh out of a hinge. The notebook gets another line. Hinges respond to manners. You pass the covered mirror and resist your ongoing curiosity. The cloth looks freshly laundered, corners folded with the precision of a napkin at a careful dinner. You write nothing here, which feels like writing something important. At 22:43, the elevator gate settles a two-note creak you recognize now as its lullaby. You log it precisely. Good, the guard says. When things sound like themselves, they're well. A useful definition of health, not just for machines. You jot that aphorism next to the time because future you will want a line to stand on. You pause at a doorway that still suggests a former life, its infill smooth, its baseboards detour, a faint admission. The corridor's air cools for 3 paces, then warms again. You note the gradient like a topographer of moods. Sometimes the building keeps a draft where a door used to be. The guard murmurs. It's not a haunting, it's a habit. You don't argue with that sentence. You adopt it. Outside, the courtyard's shrine has settled into its own midnight grammar. You catch the last curl of incense drifting upward through the eve, leaving the faintest umber trace on the wood where smoke has greeted wood for decades. You draw a small spiral in the margin, your private icon for time behaving. In the storage corridor, a row of lockers smells quietly of camphor. The guard opens one and shows you a linen bag of whole cloves, another old defense against insects. Cloves, camphor, bay leaves, a kitchen spice box moonlighting as a conservator's sidekick. You note the scent and claim it as evidence that practicality and poetry shake hands more often than admitted. A floorboard murmurs under your heel just once, like a story getting comfortable. You write, 1 creek, southeast corner, friendly. The guard tilts his head. Friendly? You shrug. Didn't try to be the main character. He accepts the rating system as if it might be standard practice elsewhere. At 23:10 you both stop because the air has edited itself. Cooler, then warmer, then cool again. You listen long enough to hear the HVAC answer from somewhere beyond a sealed door. You mark the oscillation, imagining a technician reading the same minor rhythm tomorrow and adjusting a damper with the delicacy of a harpist. Museums are orchestras you don't see. You're lucky to hear them tune. You reach the top corridor where the room with the blue walls sits thinking its private thoughts. Tonight you do not open it. The guard nods at your restraint. There are rounds you make by walking, and rounds you make by not intruding. You log door past with respect, and it feels more substantial than longer sentences. On the way down, You stop at a window cracked open just enough for confidence. The city answers from outside dishes stacked somewhere. A scooter glides by. A late laugh remembers to be quiet. You catch your reflection, half ghosted by the glass. The notebook in your hand makes you look official until you tilt your head and see the truth. You're a guest with permissions, a distinction you want to keep. Another debate pads along the banister. Did the legend of the half-empty rice bowl begin with servants' reports, or was it embroidered later for the page-turning pleasure of visitors? No ledger you've seen itemizes rice removed by uninvited forces. Oral histories nod, then suggest you refill the bowl and stop trying to solve a story that prefers to earn its keep in wonder. You write the debate as a question mark. The mark looks at home. Back near the entry hall, you record the last patrol note. 2337, humidity steady. Jasmine faint. Elevator content. Mirror dignified. Doors in good humor. You love the phrase, in good humor, for wood it fits, and wood knows when it is being treated kindly. The guard closes the notebook and returns it to its hook, as if shelving a thin but trustworthy book. Tomorrow, he says. The same if we are lucky. You realize luck here is the absence of drama, a house that breathes, art that rests, stories that stay stories. You nod, and the night nods back. When you walk away, your footfalls find a rhythm you didn't have at the start of the evening, lighter, attentive, content to let commas do the work that exclamation points ruin. You do not count the doors this time. The notebook has learned how to count for you. You return to a quieter room and sit where the light arrives as a rectangle on the floor. Morning left it there and forgot to collect it. On the table, a family ledger bound in buckram. Thread frayed like thoughts. You leaf through with 2 fingers. Slow enough to be polite. Most entries are unsurprising. Rent, received, lime for mortar, lamp oil, fabric. Then you notice a pattern that doesn't announce itself so much as linger. White linen purchased in small, regular amounts. Rice listed not by sack, but by bowl. Candles noted as 4 upstairs. Your pencil pauses over 4 upstairs, because houses rarely write adverbs, unless they are trying not to write nouns. A mainstream historical fact sits beside you and opens its own book. In colonial Saigon, disease control mixed science and stigma. The Pasteur Institute network pushed vaccines and quarantine for plague and cholera. Separate facilities were established for Hansen's disease, leprosy, and other chronic illnesses, sometimes far from city centers. Policy favored isolation. Families, guarding reputations and livelihoods, favored discretion. Between official circulars and private worry lay a corridor of improvisation, one many households walked with lowered voices. You feel the corridor under your feet now. The ledger turns another page. A line item reads, linen, washed gently. Another, rice, daily, small bowl, repeating with the regularity of breath. A month later, screen fitted to vent. Later still, mirror-covered cloth replaced. The handwriting remains steady, but the pen grows lighter ink, used sparingly, as if the writer is rationing not paper but courage. You are not solving anything. You are being allowed to stand close enough to read how someone once tried to be kind in a language that had only awkward words. Historians still debate the specifics, whether wealthy households kept ill relatives entirely at home, whether physicians visited discreetly at night, whether servants became informal nurses with instructions learned between supper and sleep. Archives offer rules. Oral history offers exceptions. Somewhere between them, This ledger writes a third category: routines that cannot forget themselves. You imagine the father this book answers to: a man who could price a block by the way wind moved down it, who could negotiate a lease with a smile that felt like shade. Now he orders linen soft enough not to scold skin and rice, measured in comfort, not cost. He instructs a mirror to forget its job. In a city that asked men like him to be made of ledger lines and signage, he practices a different arithmetic: loss divided by gentleness, rumor subtracted by ritual. An obscure tidbit takes a seat on the table corner. In Southern households, white is the color of mourning headbands tied, sleeves plain, jewelry quieted. Linen offered both breathability and symbolism. A white garment could be comfort and code at once. You glance toward the wardrobe you saw earlier and understand why the dress still hangs like a kept promise. It was never meant as costume. It was grammar. You picture the father climbing the stair at first light, one hand on the rail that your palm knows now by memory. He pauses at the threshold, not because the door resists him, but because words do. He knocks anyway. Manners are for every room, and enters with a bowl that has been filled the same way every morning, a spoon-placed handle, first toward the bed the way teachers place chalk on the lip of a board. The house keeps this choreography long after people forget to describe it. A debate you've heard in daylight returns with better manners. Was the daughter real? Or has she become the shape the house uses to remember everything that could not be said aloud? Some insist on a name and a date. Others say legend is how architecture metabolizes grief. Your pencil hovers over the page and does not choose. The ledger does not ask you to decide. It asks you to see. You flip back and find charitable entries that clasp hands with the private ones: donations to a temple, offerings listed as for the water's peace, a small gift to a kitchen shrine. Earlier you might have filed these under custom. Now they feel like engineering, tiny adjustments to the building's moral weather. The father is not bargaining with whatever he believes. He is trying to keep the rooms kind. You close the ledger halfway and let the house finish a thought. It does so by sending you a breeze that smells faintly of starch and camphor. The smell is practical cloth stored properly, but you read it differently now. A household's attempt to make a way less frightening than alone. The difference is more than poetic. In a city where reputation could, a memory from earlier in the night returns. Raised thresholds to discourage both water and wayward visitors. Mirrored cloths to shorten goodbyes. Offerings to widen patience. You realize how consistently these details have trained your eye. Architecture here is not just shelter. It is etiquette, poured into wood and tile. Doors, especially, are conversations with consequences. Closed to hold coolness, open to invite air, ajar to say, I am listening. You kneel to straighten the handkerchief. This is fussy, you know, but fussy sometimes equals kind. In case ants have their own opinions, you set a ceramic saucer under the rice, a lesson learned from courtyard altars that battle tropical enthusiasm. Another quiet fact. Many homes keep a small bowl of clean water near the altar, even outside the 7th lunar month, not because anyone expects a midnight guest, but because hospitality is a muscle. The saucer gleams under the candle's unambitious light. Behind you, the guard has paused at a tactful distance. You're leaving it open? He asks, not to contradict, but to name the choice. Just enough, you reply. Enough is a measurement museums understand. Enough humidity to keep lacquer calm. Enough wattage to safeguard pigments. Enough space for bodies to move without colliding. Tonight, enough is also how much door a story needs. He leans against the opposite wall, hands in pockets, like punctuation marks. When my grandmother told us tales, he says, she always left one sentence unfinished, said it gave the night something to do. You both look at the gap again. It looks like an unfinished sentence that knows exactly where it's going. A small, obscure piece of housekeeping joins your notebook. Older custodians sometimes place a chalk mark near an ajar door to confirm no one has widened or closed it after rounds chalk as very patient witness. You do the same. A discreet dash at the hinge side. Not as trap, but as courtesy to yourselves in the morning. Proof that restraint held. Another, historians still debate, flickers at the edge of thought. Did museums in converted residences inherit small private practices like occasional offerings, quiet altars in staff rooms? Or are those stories the public projecting domestic habits onto public buildings? Records, predictably, are mum. Night staff, also predictably, prefer not to be interviewed by their own exhibits. You leave the question resting where questions rest best, at the foot of a door that doesn't owe you a thesis. You give the door a final, almost imperceptible push. There. That's the angle. The candle's light gathers in the grain of wood and returns softly, as if the door has learned to glow back. You step aside and the draft finds its lane a whisper from the corridor through the room and out a vent you've admired for its modest engineering. Whatever needed a path now has one that minds its manners. You let time pass without forcing it to perform. A minute, then another. Numbers have been useful all evening, but they can wait in the pocket now. The silence here is not empty. It's politely occupied. You think of the ledger's lines rice by bowl, linen by breath, and realize the offering you've made is less about summoning than about recognizing. A room that was asked to hold more than rooms should hold deserves a door held open. A mainstream note gathers your bag and holds the door. Repurposed mansions like this. One survive because cities choose memory as policy funding. Caretaking. The unglamorous chores of keeping errors small and air polite. Not every house gets that vote. This one did. And you are the beneficiary. You thank the building silently, which is a useful language to keep. At the threshold, the guard asks the question you've been answering all night without words. So, you look back and offer the only experiment worth repeating. I opened a door the way you open a conversation, you say. It answered like a good host. He approves, stamps the approval with an unhurried nod, and pockets it, where approval lives best, with the keys. As you step outside, you try not to make metaphors, but Saigon insists. The street is a door opening all at once. The river is a door that never closes. The sky, a hinged lid, practicing generosity. You surrender and let the city write the ending. A scooter sighs. A vendor laughs. A fan somewhere turns at the slow speed that makes soup honest. You have your count. The house keeps its number. Both of you are correct. You walk away slower than you arrived. Not out of reluctance, but out of respect for the way thresholds move underfoot. The legend travels with you, lighter than gossip, heavier than rumor, the exact weight of a key you were trusted to carry for a few hours. You don't check your pocket for the grain of salt. You know it's there. When you reach the corner, you turn once not to wave, but to confirm an understanding. The building nods in its way, which is to say, it minds its doors. It minds its air. It minds its stories. You mind your step. The compact holds. The missing door is exactly where you left it, somewhere between attention and permission. Let your shoulders drop a little. Hear how the city smooths itself for morning no drums. Just dishes. A fan treading water. A scooter choosing second gear. You're still walking, but slower now, like a page turning itself. The house you left behind continues its quiet occupation of being a house. Inside, a hinge remembers the night's sentence. A mirror keeps its modesty. A ledger rests with the hum of closed work. None of it requires you to stay to keep happening. That is the comfort. You were welcome. You are released. Breathe in the way Jasmine never hurries. Let the thought of 99 become an easy number, not a problem to solve, but a rhythm to keep, like counting steps to fall asleep, or counting waves that fold and fold without needing to arrive. Let the rooms unspool gently behind you. The blue wall, the patient elevator, the balcony that pretended to be lace, the corridor where air cooled for 3 paces, then remembered itself. Put them down like pebbles in a shallow bowl. They'll keep their shine without your help. If a door appears tonight in your dreams, open it with the same small courtesy you practiced here. A pause, a breath, a leftward lean if the moment asks. Expect nothing particular. Let the room be what it wishes, empty, or full of rest, or just the right amount of quiet. Carry nothing heavy across the threshold. You've set down the count, the questions, the polite mysteries. They can look after themselves until morning. Now let the fan be the river. Let the pillow be lacquer, smooth and steady under the light. Somewhere, a cat edits the world by blinking. Somewhere, a caretaker chalks a tiny mark and smiles when it's still there at dawn. You don't have to keep watch. The doors know their jobs. Close your eyes.